We are delighted on today's program to continue an interview that we've had for the last few weeks with the author of this book, Dr. Leonard Moeller from Sweden. And the name of the book is The Exodus Case. Dr. Moeller, it's good to have you with us. We appreciate your coming.
It's nice to be here with you.
And Gary Stearman, of course, is here. The two of us are going to talk with him about the crossing site, the land of Midian. And Gary, you have a scripture there?
I do. I wanted to introduce this segment, J.R., by reading Exodus chapter 2, verse 15. As you know, Moses, in a fit of rage, outrage at what was happening to his people, slew an Egyptian guard. And verse 15 says, "Now when Pharaoh heard this thing, he sought to slay Moses, but Moses fled from the face of Pharaoh and dwelt in the land of Midian, and he sat down by a well." And that latter expression means that he made a place to live near a well, no doubt situated himself in a beautiful part of the land that was conducive to life as a shepherd. And J.R., we've read this verse so many times,
yes.
and Dr. Moeller, and yet we've glossed right over the whole idea of Midian, have we not?
Yes. And Midian, of course, is on the eastern shore of the Gulf of Aqaba. That's the premise that Dr. Moeller here is going to talk about. And I want you to see, this is the Nuweiba Peninsula, satellite view. Notice, please, the riverbed that fed all of this sand. In fact, you can see the streaks here as the sand over the centuries has been washed out. But I want you to notice the modern highway that goes right down through here. And this is a picture of that highway. So you can see that it's a rather wide riverbed and an easy place for the children of Israel to get to this Nuweiba Peninsula. Of course, today it's a seaport, and an Egyptian seaport, a fascinating place, and just across 8 miles east of there on the eastern shore is the ancient land of Midian.
Now, asking Dr. Moeller the key question, and believe me, he can talk for a long time on this one. What's so important about Midian as a place, as an idea?
Well, there's a very simple answer to it, and that is Mount Sinai, or Horeb, or Mountain of God, whatever you call it, is supposed to be located within the land of Midian. But when we look at the maps that we find in our Bibles,
Yes.
we find the land of Midian always located on the east side of the Gulf of Aqaba, which is most likely correct. But why is not Mount Sinai there? Because the biblical text is very clear on that. So we have the traditional Mount Sinai on the Sinai Peninsula, and we have the land of Midian on the east coast of the Gulf of Aqaba. But if we're going to follow the biblical text and look for Mount Sinai, we should begin with to look for the land of Midian. And when we look for the land of Midian, I went to, just in parentheses, with my family to London. My wife and my 2 daughters, they want to spend time on Oxford Street shopping.
All right.
And I try to escape from events like that.
I can understand.
So I spent a number of days going through all the antiquity stores of London that are specialized in maps, ancient maps. And I went through hundreds and hundreds of maps, every map you could find in London that covered the Middle East. And I can tell you on every map where the land of Midian was marked, the last at least 500 years, it was always on the east coast of the Gulf of Aqaba. And I don't think that anyone really doubts that the land of Midian is located on the east coast of the Gulf of Aqaba. What surprises me is no one ever think about that place to be the place for the Mount Sinai.
Well, traditionally, the Mount Sinai is in what we call the Sinai Peninsula today, and there's a monastery built there, St. Catherine's Monastery. Now, that dates back to the time of Constantine in the 4th century, and I think there's a kind of, well, let's call it a deep-seated idea that's been planted over a number of years that is the location of Mount Sinai. I think everyone has accepted it as an article of faith almost.
Maybe we should comment upon the traditional Mount Sinai first.
Yeah, let's do that.
Because when we say that it's located on the Sinai Peninsula, that's not really true.
Yes.
Because the Sinai Peninsula is named after the traditional Mount Sinai.
very circular
So
reasoning.
that's the reason it's called the Sinai Peninsula. To begin with, in the biblical text, it's called the wilderness of the Red Sea, the Sinai Peninsula.
Okay.
The wilderness that is between the two arms of the Red Sea. And it's not called a desert, because it's not a sandy area with sand dunes. It's a wilderness with kind of solid rock material that you can walk on, very solid material. But if we then look at the traditional Mount Sinai, everyone calls it the traditional Mount Sinai. And you mentioned the time point when they started to be interested in that place, around 300 AD. But if we assume that the Exodus took place around 1400 BC, then we talk about that they located the place 1700 years after the event without a single archaeological evidence to indicate that that was the place.
In other words, they had some idea in mind that if we send out some scouts in this direction, they will find Mount Sinai somehow.
Well, they didn't do that at all, because if you go to the place, you find a monastery, and it's called the Monastery of St. Catherine. St. Catherine was a woman that lived in Alexandria in the northern part of Egypt, and she was a Christian martyr. And there were some monks that claimed that they found her bones on the top of the highest mountain in the area, Mount St. Catherine. That's the highest peak in the area. And that's the reason they erected the monastery there. The Monastery of St. Catherine is not Monastery of Moses.
Yeah,
It's Monastery of St. Catherine, which is a fantastic place, in parentheses. It's a beautiful place, and its history is enormous. But it's not the place of Moses. But then later on, the tradition came that Jebel Musa, the mountain of Moses, was also in the area. So one decided that it was a peak that was lower than Mount Catherine to be the mountain of Moses. And then being in this monastery, you know, I went in there. I wanted to look at the monastery. And then you find Moses' well there, and a descendant of the burning bush. But if you read, they claim that this is a kind of grandchild's grandchild, so to speak, of the original bush. But anyhow, there is a bush there. And if we go to the biblical text, we know that Moses lived close to a well, but the burning bush was far away, where he went with his sheep far away to the mountain. So if you just claim that you have the well and the bush 100 meters between one another, you must be very suspicious, because it's not according to the biblical text. So they have a very nice tradition there, but I don't think it's related to the Bible. And one indication is that they call it the traditional Mount Sinai, because it's a tradition that says that that is a mountain, and that there are at least 12, 13, maybe 15 other mountains in the area that are claimed to be the mountain, mountain.
Now, when it comes to finding the mountain of Moses, that's an entirely different exercise than finding something that fits a particular preconception. And this is the thing I'd like for you to point out, because you don't start with traditional locations or traditional preconceptions. In your method of analysis, you track things almost like a detective, taking point by point by point. So, let's get back to the idea of Midian and the idea of Moses fleeing from Pharaoh. He lived there for 40 years. He became a citizen that very familiar with the whole locale, familiar with the highway, how to get there from Egypt. In other words, it makes a lot of sense that on the Exodus he would follow the familiar route.
Yes, and one can just say, to cut a long story very short, it was not possible for Moses to live with an open identity on the Sinai Peninsula, with the army of Egypt present to guard their own mines, in a very small area of land for 40 years. Absolutely impossible. He must have been somewhere else. So where was he?
Now, back to the land of Midian. J.R., this is a fascinating, I think you'll agree with me. The more you talk about this, the more fascinating it gets. We're about to run out of time in this segment, but this discussion has only started, only just begun.
Yes. You know, there's the waters of Marah, and all of the other things that the Bible talks about between Midian and, or between the crossing site and Mount Sinai. It's going to be fascinating, and I think it'll be interesting as we look into this and especially get a personal perspective from Dr. Mohler. He is the one who wrote this book, The Exodus Case, and also produced this video entitled The Exodus Revealed. It's a fascinating study, and we'll tell you more about it and how you can get a copy of it. We'll be back in just a moment. We're talking with Dr. Leonard Mohler, professor at the Karolinska Institute in Stockholm, Sweden, about his book, The Exodus Case. And I'm looking at pages 126 and 127 that has some old maps on it showing the land of Midian. Would you explain this to us, please?
Yes, I went through many, many maps, and unfortunately I also bought too many of them. They're very expensive. But these maps, I were interested in them because I wanted to know where do they mark or where do they put the label, so to speak, of Midian or Madian. And in all of them, Midian is located on the east coast of the Gulf of Aqaba. And I have one map here that is published or printed 1719. And the interesting thing there is that Midian is on the east coast of the Gulf of Aqaba. And then the cartographer made a note here that also the caves of Jethro are located in the same place. And Jethro was the father-in-law of Moses.
Yes, fascinating.
So here we have a tradition or an understanding or an historic knowledge that was transferred and existed 1719. And
this other map here is of the same one?
Yeah, no. Then
this is a different map?
Then we have a different map here. And that one is a rather modern one. This is from 1911. And that's another indicator that we have the land of Midian on the east coast of the Gulf of Aqaba. Interesting, though, is that we find a mountain ridge that's called Hagar or Agar or Agar.
Yes, I see that.
Depending on the language it was used when it was printed, it's an H or not in the beginning of that.
And that's from 1719. That's amazing, yes. Gary. This mountain of Hagar rings a bell to me.
Oh, it does. And J.R., this is where Paul, writing to the Galatians, is illustrating the covenant of law versus the covenant of grace. When he talks about law, of course, he would be talking about Mount Horeb. And he writes in Galatians 4:24, which things are an allegory, for these are the two covenants. The one from the Mount Sinai, which gendereth to bondage, which is Hagar. For this Hagar is Mount Sinai in Arabia, and answereth to Jerusalem, which now is and is in bondage with her children. We could read on, but that is exciting to discover.
Gary, I've always considered that to be Hagar, the wife of Abraham, mother of Ishmael. And it looks like he not only ties that to her, but also ties it to the name of the mountain range where Jabal al-Lawz is located, or Mount Horeb, or what is the biblical Sinai.
Which, by the way, it really feeds into the point that we're trying to make, and here it is. This says that Mount Sinai is in Arabia. Now, what we call the Sinai Peninsula today has never been called Arabia, correct?
That's true. That's true. Absolutely. It's never been considered to be Arabia. That has been east of the Gulf of Aqaba. So again, according to that reference, we have to look into today's Saudi Arabia.
Now, you go on to point out that the area of these caves of Jethro, that there is a well of Moses, and that is fairly close to the traditional Mount Horeb.
Yeah, the interesting thing is also when the early investigators was in this area, one of them stated that it's strange that in the area of Jabal al-Lawz, there is a tradition that says that that ridge is called Hurab. And that is something that has been in the local tradition for ages, obviously. But looking at something else, and that is the first really scientific investigation of the land of Midian. That was performed 1878 by a British officer named Richard Burden. He was going around in the area mainly looking for minerals and as a cartographer documenting and giving structures. And he made the first real map, so to speak, of the area. And he met Bedouins, and he got information from them also. And interestingly, where one of the maps states that the caves of Jethro are located, on his map, very close to that, he states that Moses' well, according to Bedouin tradition, was located there 1878. And that is on walking distance, 1 day's walking distance from Jabal al-Lawz, the mountain we believe is Mount Horeb or Mount Sinai.
And so there's the well that we read about a moment ago in Exodus, fairly close, 10, 12 miles away from Jabal al-Lawz, the name of the mountain of God. And J.R., this is holy ground, is it not?
Yes, I mean, Jebel al-Lawz here is right on the northern end of a mountain range called the Hagar Mountain Range.
Yes.
That's absolutely fascinating.
It is.
And it's there on the maps. And
Yes.
old maps kind of lost knowledge because we look at the modern maps and then they don't mention
yes.
these things. Jabal al-Lawz is found on modern maps.
Christian theologians made these modern maps,
Yeah.
and
And
they
do you know what-
failed to
Yeah.
see some of the older maps, didn't they?
What Jabal al-Lawz means. Do you know what it stands for?
You're going to tell us, I'm sure.
It means the mountain of almonds, the almond mountain. And then
Almonds. Like the almond tree?
almond tree.
Oh, my
the mountain
goodness.
of the almond tree or the mountain of the almond.
The menorah was built with the
Almond tree.
idea of the almond tree.
Yeah, and was covered with gold. But the staff or the rod
That
of
budded.
Moses.
The staff that budded.
That's right.
It was
budded
the almond.
didn't
Yeah.
it?
Wow, so we have the Mount of Almonds.
Yeah.
And isn't there a tremendous tradition that this mountain is a very special place?
Yes.
Don't the locals hold it to be a sort of a holy place?
Still today, it's been mentioned sometimes in the history, also going back when investigations have been there, but still today, they consider it to be holy, the local Bedouins, or a place where God resides, or a place where you don't play around, or, I mean,
Yes.
it's a kind of special mountain for the area, yes.
J.R., this is truly fantastic.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, Flavius Josephus talks about the first time Moses fled from Pharaoh and went to Midian and became the shepherd of Jethro's flocks. And that the local shepherds in the area said there's plenty of room. I'm quoting from Flavius Josephus here. Says there's plenty of room for your sheep, but don't go up to that mountain. God lives there.
Yeah,
it's
exactly.
a scary place. So it was off limits to the local people because other worldly events had been occurring on and around that mountain for years and years. That's really
And
amazing.
Josephus, he wrote his history of the Jews around 2,000 years back. But that was around 14 or 1,500 years after these events.
Indeed, yeah.
So there existed a knowledge that that mountain or mountain ridge was holy of some reason
Yes.
for the locals.
So the mountain was holy before Moses ever got there. And then Moses had the experience of meeting God in the burning bush. And then, of course, in later years, Elijah went there and met with God. And then even in New Testament days, in the days of Flavius Josephus, Saul of Tarsus went there after his conversion on the road to Damascus and spent 3 years in that mountain. He claims that he got revelations from which he wrote the New Testament concepts of salvation by grace. And it's just, and he became the apostle to the Gentiles.
J.R.,
All that revolves around Sinai.
As you're speaking, I'm thinking my mind is running a mile a minute. But think about this: the law was given at that mountain. Paul went down there and received grace.
Amen.
It's the same
Yeah.
mountain, you know.
Yeah.
Well, God said to Moses, "Thou hast found grace in my eyes." you know.
Yes, absolutely.
And so, in fact, the Jew believes that he's saved by grace,
Yeah.
not by law.
Well, we're
And it's
down.
very important to realize that we cannot put the law against or in opposition to the grace of the New Testament. It is exactly the same. I mean, it's the fulfillment of it. And we should remember that Jesus actually stated that not a single dot of the law and the prophets would be changed, would be altered.
Wow, that's a wonderful thought upon which to conclude. We're
Yes.
down to our last minute. But I must say, if you have a friend who is intellectually inclined to study, loves history, but maybe is a little bit of a skeptic, we can recommend a book that he will love. This book appeals to the intellect, it appeals to the scientific analysis, and yet it has in it the message of faith. It's called The Exodus Case. J.R.?
Yeah, and you know, the video shows those chariot wheels in motion. It's just fascinating. Of course, it's also produced on DVD, which has a segment in there from the Ten Commandments with Charlton Heston. Cecil B. DeMille tells how and why he made the movie. Wow. This is a fascinating one as well. And so, this concludes this program, but I'll tell you, we've got more to go. We'll have another program when we continue our interview with Dr. Mohler. We'll be back in just a moment.
I'm holding here my personal copy of The Exodus Case by Dr. Leonard Mohler. This is a valued book. I treasure it, along with some of the most exciting books I've ever read, and it's right up there at the top. Dr. Mohler is a lecturer. He's a medical doctor at the Karolinska Institute of Stockholm, Sweden. Very prestigious position. More than that, he's a Bible-believing Christian who went on an archaeological expedition, actually a series of them, to document the events of the Exodus. Who was the Pharaoh of the Exodus? What was the track across the desert to the Red Sea crossing? Where did they cross? And after they got there, where was the land of Midian, the mountain of God? What can be found there? Well, actually, you'll see pictures of rock carvings at the base of the mountain of God, an altar that was built by the children of Israel. So much evidence in pictures, 317 pages, almost 600 four-color pictures in this book. You call 1-800-883-1809 to get your copy, and JR, they'll love it, I'm sure.
Yes, they will. It's $34.95 for the book. But Dr. Mohler has also produced a companion video called The Exodus Revealed. They put an underwater camera down at the bottom of the Red Sea and took pictures of the wreckage across the 8-mile crossing site. Dozens of chariot wheels, some still on the axles. It's an absolute must for you to see. So it's $19.95, and it's available on VHS, but also on DVD for $24.95. The DVD has extra footage, including Cecil B. DeMille telling how he made and why he made the Ten Commandments. If you'll get the book for $34.95 and one of the videos, your choice of either the VHS or the DVD, we'll send you an extra bonus as well. Gary?
And that bonus is Prophecy in the News, 12 issues, an annual subscription, regularly valued at $29.95. Yours absolutely free when you order this very, very exciting offer that we have for you. Believe me, you're going to be showing your friends the Exodus Case. You'll be inviting them over to look at those videos, and they will be awe-stricken, I promise you. But most of all, we want you to have a copy of this book, The Exodus Case, in my opinion, a landmark production. Dr. Mohler has done something very special here. And by the way, he told us that he did this as much as anything for the skeptic, for the individual who maybe has a little trouble believing the narratives of the Bible. Here are the facts, carefully documented with hundreds of pictures. The Exodus Case. Just call the 800 number on your screen right now, 1-800-883-1809, and we will rush this book to your home.
We have one more program in our interview with Dr. Leonard Mohler, author of the book, The Exodus Case. And we're going to go to Mount Sinai and to the rock from which the water sprang. Gary, that's going to be an interesting program.
JR, we are going to reach the pinnacle of this study, so you must tune in next time because Dr. Mohler is going to talk about all of the archaeology around the Mount of Moses. It's going to be the best study you have ever seen on Prophecy in the News. I can promise you that.
And Dr. Mohler, thanks for being with us on our program, talking about this fascinating book and the videos that you've done as well.
It's been very nice to be here with you.
If you'd like to have a copy of our magazine, you have not received a sample copy and you'd like to get one, we invite you to call the phone number at the bottom of your screen. This is J.R. Church and Gary Stearman. Until next time, keep looking up.
Prophecy in the News is a viewer-supported ministry sponsored by our many friends across America and in your area. For your gift of $10, you can receive a special edition of our current program on audio tape, or for a gift of $20, we'll send you our programs on videotape. For either order, call the 800 number on your screen right now.